Hello guys, I'm Oscar and welcome to Scouting for Goals. In this weekly series, I show you how I use the Fantasy Football Scouts members area to help me with my FPL decisions. If you are not a member yet, you can sign up through the link in the description below and get a 20% discount. In this video, we will take a look at which players have been starting the last 2 seasons the strongest, the best FPL players in the first 6 game weeks of each of those seasons. But first, let's just reflect on how much we should care about whether someone has had strong starts to the seasons historically. Early season performance is going to vary from season to season and is going to be dependent on many things. Who has had good preparation, who has settled into a team very well. These are factors that will vary from season to season to a degree, but there will also be players who seemingly will have very similar conditions from one season start to the other. And in these cases, a start of season form could be an indicator of how they perform next season. And just like how some players seem extra eager to score in the last game week of the season, it could be worth looking into if there's something similar going on with the start of seasons. I've seen a couple of FPL pundits mention in preseason that they are looking at the last couple of game weeks from last season to decide who is a good pick. I think that can be a useful way of looking at current ability, but the fact is that there will be some different dynamics that will be in effect at the end of seasons versus in the beginning of them. For instance, some teams will be on the beach and other teams might be choking like Leicester has done in the last 2 seasons. There will also be players by the end of seasons who are burnt out, since the end of seasons are filled with double game weeks and European Cup games, which exhausts players. There might be players who are more focused on winning those European Cups, or they might be saving themselves for an international coming up tournament and don't want to injure themselves. And another situation could be that someone who has a tough previous season might view this new season as a fresh start of sorts and get off the ground running. And that's just a couple of examples from the top of my head why I think it's handy to mix the data from the end of last season with the data we look at today. With that said, I wouldn't consider the historical data that we find in this video as a main driving force to pick a player. Instead, it can function as a tiebreaker if you are torn between a couple of players. How I set this up was that I created the table of my own in the members area on the Scout site. I chose to include the following metrics: assists, goals, big chances, shots inside the box, expected assists, and expected goals. And if you remember, you can customize your own version of this table. And if you're more interested in who has been the best by the end of last season, you could just change the game week range here manually, or you could choose a preset time frame like last 6 matches. Now let's see who the best assets have been. The first metric is big chances, and interestingly, Callum Wilson leads this. And if we even go 3 seasons back, he is still in the lead, but then he's tied with Salah. Kane and Son are here and features on many of the other tables, mainly thanks to their incredible start of last season. It's also worth pointing out that the 2 Manchester teams had a blank game week in the beginning of last season, so they played fewer minutes, but it hasn't stopped Sterling from appearing here, and I think he's an interesting shout considering his Euro form. But unless Manchester City signs a better striker, I'm likely not going for any of their attacking assets. Mané is also a shout considering he was performing well at the end of last season, but I'm a bit concerned if he'll have his minutes managed because Jota can play on that left wing too. Let's look at assists now. A lot of similarities here, but what I find most interesting is that the 2 premium Liverpool fullbacks show up here. Let's take a look at the top 10 for goals. And there's a lot of similarities with the big chances table that I showed first, which makes a lot of sense. And so far we can see that it's the tail of premiums plus Wilson plus Calvert-Lewin and also Abraham. Antonio and Bamford would probably have a good chance of appearing here if they had more minutes under their belts in the same time frame. And it just shows how good that price bracket is on paper, filled with different cool options. Top 10 for shots inside the box is also similar with Salah and Kane up there, but we see the introduction of Mopé and Raúl Jiménez for the first time. Something I found when I looked at these numbers was that shots inside the box was heavily correlated with goals. Makes sense, right? Since most goals are scored inside the box. I found 2 players that stood out, however, and were a contrast to this trend, and it was Vardy, who didn't need a lot of shots in the box, who has been clinical anyway, and then there was Richarlison, who has been extraordinarily wasteful. I think that's a part of his game, that maybe he shoots in tricky angles, for instance, or when he's not completely in control of his body movement, but he likes to shoot anyway. In the top 10 for expected assists, there's a lot of premium playmakers, plus a few premium goal scorers, and then there's 2 quite unexpected names in March and Westwood, who both cost 5.5, which isn't an appealing price tag for me, considering there will be a few 5.5 defenders who will be capable of scoring double their scores, and likely also some cheap striker that appears who will be beating their scores as well when all is said and done. Another table before we look at the overall standings is expected goals, where Callum Wilson is in the lead, and another notable name is Zaha, who seems to start seasons quite well in general and can be a bit streaky, which isn't wrong if you're going for a punt. With that said, he has a tricky start to the season, and it looks like he's correctly priced at 7 million. Now let's look at the overall standings, which shows how many times the player has appeared as a top 10 player in any of these metrics. Salah is the only one with a perfect score of 6, and after that there's a few surprises, at least for me. Wilson and Calvert-Lewin are players with great opening fixtures this year, and I have fond memories of owning them in the start of the last 2 seasons, so I might go for them both this time actually. One more important thing to address is that there were an absurd amount of penalties being awarded at the start of last season, which helped players like Vardy, and I think it's useful here to look at both the expected goals as well as non-penalty expected goals, because then we can see that Wilson's expected goals drops by 1.6, which is 2 penalties over these 2 years, and Vardy and Salah had 3 in that time, so that needs to be taken into consideration, but at the same time getting 1 or 1.5 penalty on average in a 6-game period is a very reasonable outcome for the pen takers. I've given you some things to consider, and I'm gonna end the video here. Let me know in the comments if there was any player mentioned in the video who you hadn't considered until now, or if there was someone who has solidified his place in your team. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to get more content like this. Take care, and I hope to see you soon.